Okay, greetings and welcome to another. I don't know if I'm muted. Oh, no, I'm not. Okay, greetings and welcome to another edition of the Gaddy's Pan African Community News Update. Today's date is the 10th of May 2026. I'm Brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu. I'm flying solo today, so there's no Sister Oleander in the studio. So I've got the chats enabled and they'll come up automatically as and when you chat. I won't be able to really access them in the same way as usual, but I'll keep glancing over to see if there's anything there that catches my eye. But as ever, if you are with us, it'll be good to have a check to know that you're watching and listening and you can hear everything okay. Yeah, I don't know. We've had a jam-packed program as ever. It's been quite a few weeks. So I'm just going to go over most of the community-related news for, I think it's the last month, really. So I think it's over a month since our last broadcast. As ever, if you're watching live, you're welcome to interact with us through Facebook or YouTube. And of course, blah, blah, blah. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if you find this broadcast useful. Now, like I said, running live, I'm flying solo, so I don't actually know if you're there. The chats will just come up automatically, so please behave. I can't edit them and stuff. I can either turn it on or off. Yeah, let's get going. And yeah, a check just so I know that you can see us and hear us okay, would be greatly appreciated. I'm going to move on though, because like I said, it's a lot to review. And I'm going to go into our first section, which you know is We Remember, where we really do libations and make tributes to any notable anniversaries that have taken place over the last month and a half. And so I'm going to start off with the first passing, which is to, I didn't actually hear about this, which is to the rapper, DJ, and hip hop pioneer, African Bambaataa. Now, he recently joined the Ancestors. Many of you will know him as a group, as one of the instigators of the group called Hip Hop Alliance, which is a group organized by the musician Curtis Blow. African Bambaataa was, his group was called the Sonic Force. And right in the early days of hip hop, he established a particular sound. You know, many of you will be familiar with 808 beats, but this is something that he kind of like started out with and started letting people kind of like get used to. He's quite inspirational. Now, like I said, Hip Hop Alliance, which is another group by Curtis Blow. Curtis Blow, I think his tune was "If I Ruled the World," I think was the name of his song. He has kind of like made a comment about acknowledging the transition of a foundational architect of hip hop culture. He says, as the founder of the Universal Zulu Nation, which was the name of the group or the membership organization that African Bambaataa helped shape, the early identity of hip hop as a global movement was rooted in peace, unity, love, and having fun. Now, what this group has also acknowledged, is something I was unaware about, was that there are allegations of child sexual abuse made against African Bambaataa. At the same time, however, the group is saying that it recognizes that his legacy is complex and has been a subject of serious conversations within our community. And as an organization committed to truth and accountability and the preservation of hip hop culture, it's still important to acknowledge and hold space for all voices while continuing to uplift what empowers and protects the people. Now, I don't know much about that history and those allegations. He denied it. You know, he was accused of sexual abuse of children, trafficking. Some men, multiple men actually, in Bronx accused him of molestation. So he says that these accusations are baseless and were basically an attempt to tarnish my reputation. But like I said, you know, he made a serious contribution to hip hop. We're just remembering that contribution. Yeah, I'll leave it there. So it's much echoes with what's going on with Michael right now with the film that's out there. Okay, let's see what's next. Okay, so the next, I can see it, someone's on the chat. I don't know why it didn't pop up on the screen, but thank you for letting me know that you can see us, which is cool. Much appreciated. That's Kickboxer Girl. Thank you. I'm flying solo, so you know there might be a few gremlins as I'm trying to work out how to operate the system. So yeah, but thank you and much appreciated for showing that. Let me see. Oh, hold on, this is how we might do it. There we go. I think I've got it working now. Okay, so the next libation is to the Trinidadian-born social scientist and educator Clarence Thompson, who recently joined the ancestors. He was one of the founders of Presentation Housing Association and the chair of the West Indian Standing Conference. Now, this was founded in 1958, which followed the Notting Hill race riots to combat discrimination in housing and employment. Now, Clarence Thompson played a central role in organising people of African heritage in their communities and advocating for change at a crucial point in British history. He spent decades helping to bridge divides between Britain's ethnic communities or populations and contributing to the groundwork that would later inform institutions such as the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So we acknowledge the passing of Clarence Thompson. The next libation, sorry, I'm just recovering from the cold, so I don't have all the lurgies, but I have all the phlegm still in my throat. So my apologies for that. I am doing much better. The next libation is to the champion boxer Tony Cisse, and he joined the ancestors following a courageous battle with motor neuron disease. His impact was felt across every level of the sport. He was a standout amateur. He reached international levels with Repton Boxing Club, proudly representing both England and Team GB. Now, his achievements in the ring included competing at Commonwealth Games, becoming NAC national champion in 1999, and representing England in 4 nations. He also went on to found the Omnibus Amateur Boxing Club, where he became a driving force in developing young talent and supporting his local community. Amongst those he worked with were future like celebrities, including Anthony Yard and Hora Davis. Now, he was widely regarded as a tireless mentor. He dedicated his life to helping others through boxing, and his philosophy of boxing is love is underpinned everything he did, using the sport not only to develop champions in the ring, but to guide and inspire young people beyond it. So Tony Cisse, we remember. The next libation is to Marcy Skeet, who was elected a councillor for Longthornton Ward in 2014, having already given years of voluntary service to her community through the Mitcham and Morden Labour Party and the Guyana UK Social Development Association. Now, she went on to hold several significant roles, including cabinet member for Women and Equalities and chair of the Joint Consultative Committee with Ethnic Minority Organisations. And in the image you can see, she also served as Mayor of Merton for the 2017-2018 municipal year. She was born and raised in Guyana, as she built her career around education and rehabilitation, working as a lecturer of English at High Down Prison, among other roles. Local leaders has described her as a joyful presence who went the extra mile for her community. We remember. Now, the next story is not a libation, it's just a reflection on a piece of history. This is Matthew Henson, who was the first explorer to arrive at the North Pole on the 6th of April, 1909. Now, we're talking about it today in May because this is the first program we've had in a month and a bit. So he and his team arrived approximately 45 minutes prior to fellow discoverer Robert Peary. He is a son of Maryland sharecroppers, and his exploration began at the age of 12 when he received a job as a cabin boy on the merchant ship Katie Hines, which sailed out of Baltimore. Now, the captain of that vessel, Captain Hines, taught Henson navigation, and he traveled the world with him. They explored the Arctic for over 20 years, and he learned how to speak Inuit languages and how to survive the extreme weather. But it took 7 attempts, and after those 7 attempts, he finally reached the North Pole, and his expedition was successful. That's on the 8th attempt. So we remember. And the next libation is to a man hopefully many of you are familiar with, and this is to our ancestor Carter G. Woodson, who joined the ancestors on the 3rd of April in 1950. Now, he began what was first branded Negro History Week, which was the forerunner to what we now call African History Month, or in America, African American History Month. Now, he was a noted historian, a journalist, author, and foundation of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, currently known as the Association for Study of African American Life and History. Now, he was born to enslaved African Americans, and he was born in 1975. He was remembered quite passionately and very, I don't know, like myself, with reverence as a historian, a journalist, an author, and many people give him the title of the father of Black history. I use the term there because that's what was common at the time. Carter G. Woodson, we remember. Another name, and the last one for this section that you'll be familiar with is obviously that of the civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King, who was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee on the 4th of April, 1968. He was murdered while standing on the balcony outside his second floor room at Lorraine Motel. He was there with Jesse Jackson, as many of you recall. We spoke about that, I think, in the last broadcast. When news of his assassination came out, it prompted major outbreaks of violence and uprisings, resulting in more than 40 deaths and nationwide and extensive property damage in over 100 American cities. There's a great song by, what's his name, Gregory Porter. Two songs, actually, When Love Was King, and what's the other one, When the Fire Burned Hot. I've forgotten the name of it, but he's got two songs on his first album really talking about this history. James Earl Ray, a 40-year-old escaped fugitive, later confessed to the crime and was sentenced to a 99-year prison term. I don't really need to talk much about the amazing legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. Much of it's been squandered by the American administration that's currently sitting in the White House. But this was the anniversary of his assassination, and we're remembering him as he does his work continuously in the ancestral realm. Okay, that's the last one for the libation section. You are watching the Gaddy's Pan-African Community News Update. If you are watching live, as usual, you can interact with us live through Facebook or YouTube. I say interact with us live. I'm flying solo. There's no Sister Oleander, so you're going to have to put up with my voice for the next hour or so. It'll probably get progressively worse. So please feel free to use the chat and talk amongst yourselves. I can glance over at it, and if I see comments, I'll say something. But it's quite difficult because the way the setup is. Sister Oleander normally handles that. But it's your program. It's up to you to share your views, and I'll do my best to respond when I can and where I can. I'm going to continue going on now. This is UK news. Again, like I said, this is our term 3 program. We run the program during university terms. And so this is covering the stories from the last month and a bit. Now, one story that we touched upon quite a lot was the situation that took place at the BAFTAs earlier this year in February, where we know that there was the use of the N-word by John Davidson, who's a Tourette's campaigner. Now, we've covered this story quite extensively. The only reason why it's here now is because there's finally been a report published by the BBC looking into investigating 2 complaints, and they basically recognised that they fell short in a duty of care towards the guests, members and viewers when this racial epithet was shouted at the film awards. But they say that there was no malicious intent. I think everyone kind of knows this. Everyone kind of accepts that it wasn't a malicious intent. I think the problem was that there wasn't safeguards in place, and that the decision to let it go, unaired, or to let it go aired while other comments were censored. So there's something rotten at the core of their policies. They haven't really addressed that issue. I could read out some of the things they said. They apologise unreservedly, blah, 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 blah. And we could go through all of that stuff. It doesn't really deal with the issue. That, yes, we know that, and we can accept that John Davidson didn't deliberately try to insult and abuse like Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Linder, but he did. And the fact that it was aired and the audiences who were watching live were also insulted is something the BBC haven't really addressed. And that's something their response says that they'll look into these things. They identified a number of structural weaknesses in the BAFTA's planning and blah, 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 blah. There was an independent review by Rise Associates. But like I said, this is a kind of water is wet situation. Get to the crux of it. What are you going to do to make sure this can never happen again? Excuse me. The next story is about a group of traders in the Brixton Plaza who've won a High Court fight to stop eviction. Now, this is where 27 independent businesses who were based in Brixton Shopping Centre basically came together for protests after receiving 4 weeks' notice to leave. And this decision, or this 4 weeks' notice, was actually overturned following a High Court injunction which ruled that they were entitled to proper notice and protection from eviction. Now, despite the legal decisions, there's still concerns high amongst the traders, with many worried about their futures and having to start all over again. And it's important to understand this is an injunction. Doesn't mean that they're not still going to be evicted, but it's a good development. It gives them time to think. The Brixton Plaza management claims the landlord had signed a new lease with Aldi, which would take over the space, and that the Berners charity shop after offering what was described as a very high rent. And we've seen this all over the UK, certainly in London. When we talk about gentrification, we have companies coming in and redeveloping on a space where small traders exist. Now, the eviction notices that they received were described as tenancies at will, which are informal short-term occupation of property, like documents that can be ended at any time by either the landlord or the tenant. But what happened was that legal firm Lede argued that the traders were operating under full commercial leases despite having this, and hence the injunctions come in place. There's many comments I have in front of me about what some of the traders are saying. Fabian Michael has run an Eritrean cafe at the market for 6 years, and she said the eviction notice has left her devastated. Very sad, really. I feel empty because this is my business, this is my life. And there are far more other stories like this. Here in beauty trader Catalina Paul, who opened her salon in the place in 2019. She said she was worried about losing her customers, her loyal customers. She knows how difficult it is to build up that relationship. And the customers are also close to her. She says they've become like family. But in a statement, Lambeth Council said it was not involved in the decision to evict the tenants following the approval of planning permission. And it's unfortunate that a landlord has chosen to take this course of action in relation to its tenants. And this is part of the problem. The councils give planning permission when it comes down to these commercial developments, and then they leave the dirty work to the landlords who evict anyone who's there. This is going to keep going on. There has been a new renters bill that's slightly different from this, which is in the commercial sector. But temporary reprieve. The next story is one about a 16-year-old boy who's been charged with a murder after we now know that Igosa Igboyo, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, was shot dead in Woolwich on the 2nd of April. Now, the 16-year-old boy was first arrested on the 4th of April. He was released on bail, but he was later rearrested a few days later. Now, officers were called to the scene in Lord Warwick Street, which is close to the Woolwich Ferry and Woolwich Dockyard train station, to reports of a shooting at around 3:40 p.m. On the 2nd of April. But Augusta was pronounced dead at the scene. His family continue to be supported by specialist officers, and investigations are going. I don't know what I can say when we're in a situation where we have a 16-year-old boy shooting dead a 14-year-old boy in the middle of the afternoon in London. It's a horrific story. It's a tragedy for all the families involved, including the one who's been charged with murder. It's how, I don't know what to say. Okay, while we're on the topic of young people, many of you will remember that there was a lot of concern over young people gathering in Clapham last month. And there was, people call it as mayhem. They were saying that there's some serious disorder as hundreds of young people descended upon Clapham High Street and Clapham Common and engaged in noisy practices, behaviour, including some shoplifting. I'm not going to kind of like skirt around that. Now, as a result of that, the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has announced there would be £30 million of funding for a youth lates programme, which is aiming to bring positive opportunities after school, at weekends and during the holidays in all 32 boroughs. Now, we've heard a lot of talk about this before, this kind of thing. We're going to bring back the youth clubs and we're going to do all sort of stuff. We'll have to wait and see. £30 million is a good start. I don't know how far it will spread across 32 boroughs, but the whole idea of having facilities for young people after school and at the weekends is a good one. Sadiq says that we saw the unacceptable scenes in Clapham on 2 nights where groups of young people thought it was acceptable to break the law and spread fear in a local community. And that's why I'm investing a record £30 million to deliver at least one high quality late night youth club in every single London community. It will give young Londoners somewhere safe to go, opportunities to help them fulfill their potential, and give them supportive teams of trusted adults. Now, like I said, it's good that we're having this focus again on youth clubs and services for young people. What really annoys me is that it takes young people to actually, kind of like be a little bit naughty, engage in some kind of antisocial behaviour en masse before the money just magically appears to deliver these kind of services. There's something fundamentally wrong when it takes young people having to kind of like kick things up before there's any kind of like investment in their future and in their well-being. But this is a positive step. Let's see how far that 30 million goes. City Hall are saying it's the biggest ever investment in youth clubs by a mayor, and it's going to keep young people safe and tackle the causes of crime. I'm not sure that's 100% true, but hopefully those who attend will be kept safe from harm. Okay, and this next story, we spoke about this story about Edna Umbaka, the Kenyan student whose body was found in the water in Raysbury. Now, there's been a fundraiser launched to send her body back to Kenya. And so that's all this story is really about. The fundraiser just reads that funding the untimely death of our beloved sister and daughter, Edna Mambali Umbako. This fundraiser has been set up to support the cost of repatriation from the United Kingdom to Kenya and associated funeral costs. So anyone who's interested, please, you can go on to GoFundMe, type her name in, and you can make a contribution. Now, we still don't know. The police are investigating the situation. We don't know what happened. Her disappearance has prompted loved ones pleading to the public to basically find out, where she's travelled, what was going on. So we still don't know what's going on. It's still suspicious, but the family would like to place her body to rest. While we're on the topic of evictions and housing, this one, I think we touched on this, but I've got a little bit more information. This is one where the management board of a South London housing estate has been told it will face legal action if it doesn't start working with residents. So just to give you the background, occupants of the Loughborough estate near Brixton said that they had been dealing with severe health and safety risks, including sewage leaks, damp, mould, and flooding in their homes for years. Now, they claim the problems were a result of financial mismanagement by the Loughborough Estate Management Board and the Tenant Management Organisation. And they've said that, there had been limited support from Lambeth Council. And this is a common theme you'll pick up, that kind of like services that we used to associate with the council are now being outsourced. Tenant management organisations they're normally a good idea because the tenants are involved in that. But in this particular case in Brixton, it's not, because following an audit in December, the council referred the Loughborough Estate Management Board to the Financial Conduct Authority, which issued them a warning notice for failure to file audited accounts for the last financial year. So they've been given the money, the council, but there's not filed accounts. We don't know what's happened with the money. But how the residents are telling, like journalists like BBC London, that strong council action should have been taken years ago. One resident who didn't want to be named said that they'd been living in a Grenfell-style twilight zone with no accountability while residents suffered. Now, of course, the council's going to push back because it's going to say it had the law inside, and it argues that it's been heavily constrained by current TMO legislation and had written to the government calling for urgent reform of the law. The council said it had been actively attempting to engage with the Loughborough Estate Management Board for some time now, and had issued a final warning requiring them to take immediate action to solve these issues, otherwise they were going to take further action. So this is an ongoing one, threats of legal action while the tenants are still living in conditions which are affecting their health. So again, we'll keep you up to date as we get more and more on this story. The next one is quite a sweet one, really. Perhaps it should have been in the good news section, but I don't know, really. This is one where an anonymous benefactor has stepped in at the last minute to save the music boutique from closure in Kennington. Now, what happened, just to give you more context, is that the organisation, which is African-owned, had grown debts during the COVID pandemic. This as a result of the complete halt to lessons, like many other companies and businesses at that time, despite the continued requirement to pay rent and interest to the landlord what must. And this is a housing association that aims to provide affordable housing and community development. So there's something not quite marrying up, quite there. So their debt kept on growing during COVID, and as soon as COVID, stopped, they became a functioning, solvent school again. But they could not face the large lump sum or repay it all at once, and so they set up a crowdfunder to be paid the full debt by the 11th of March. But they couldn't raise the money, and so the effort had received vocal support from local residents and BAFTA winners like Adil Akhtar, whose children actually attended the school. And so they were facing closure, being kicked out. And just in the nick of time, a loan from an unknown donor saved the school from being evicted. Now, just before the loan came in, the crowdfunder had collected £18,000. And James Oshaw, the school's founder, said he had planned to use the cash to relocate. However, since the loan has temporarily saved the school from relocating, there's a strange thing now that the debt has to still be repaid, which is why the crowdfunding source is still open. So they're struggling. They've been there for 30 years, or almost 30 years. They're housed in two former shops. They provide a cozy, safe space for child-led music tuition, and they pride themselves on letting children choose their own pace and instruments. It sounds like a fantastic initiative, and it's a crime that they're having to rely on the goodwill of the public to survive. It's a crime when multi-million companies were getting furloughed. They were finding their costs were being subsidized. There were these tracks of contracts. It's the smaller organizations that are doing good community work. We're just talking about the need for youth clubs, and the mayor injecting 30 million across London. Well, it's these other spaces, these small spaces that people ignore, that need that kind of help. And they've been doing it, like I said, for almost 30 years. And then if we're going to go back to other initiatives where the mayor is helping, this year the mayor has announced an additional £4.6 million in funding to support the Notting Hill Carnival. And this is as it celebrates its 60th anniversary. I think if it wasn't on its 60th anniversary, there'd be more attacks. There's still going to be attacks to close it down, but because it's kind of like seen as an important milestone, the voices will clamor down for a little bit. And now this almost £5 million, 4.6 million, is going to enable the organisers to deal with the claims that there is potential overcrowding at the event. And this is something that's kind of got more noise following an independent review coming to that conclusion. Now, the celebration of African Caribbean history and culture is described by many as the world's biggest street parties or street festivals. And I don't like that particular term, but according to City Hall, they say that it boosts the economy by almost £40 million. And that's if you think about, people traveling in and out to the region, kind of like all the preparation for it, the food and, the transport, the paraphernalia. It's a huge industry. So they're not looking at it from a cultural point of view as we do. They're looking at it from a financial point of view. So that 4.6 million is an investment. And Sadiq is saying that the growth in size and popularity of the event has meant that safety and security need to be improved. And he was stepping in with his support to ensure that what he calls a hugely important event for our capital can take place as we build a better London for everyone. Now, we couldn't unpack all of this stuff, but I'm going to go to Ian Comfort, the chair of the Notting Hill Carnival, who says that the mere support meant that they could put on a safe, spectacular and sustainable carnival. He said that the funding will help let organisers be responsible for duties historically managed by the police, allowing the force to focus on their core policing duties during the event. And again, so what will happen is that the Notting Hill Carnival Trust will provide an extra 1,000 more security guards, crowd safety experts, and even Wi-Fi so they can communicate more. And that's where the money is ending up going. So it's a shame because, you hear about like this almost £5 million and you'd think this would go to actually enrich those who have actually kept this institution alive, this cultural practice, but it'll just go towards more policing, even though it'll be more like private contractors. Okay, and next story is one of Caroline Dubois, who has settled her rivalry with Terry Harper with a unanimous victory to pick up the WBO lightweight title and become unified lightweight champion. Now, I don't know anything about boxing, let alone boxing in the lightweight arena, or that with female and women boxing, nothing at all. But what I can tell you is that Dubois, who held the WC title, headed into the bout. She won with scores of 98 to 91, 98 to 91, and 97 to 92. Apparently, this is a good thing. First of all, can I say a massive thank you to everyone? This is what she says. Like this atmosphere, this energy, she said. Women boxing has always been on the back burner of boxing. Everyone who fought in the card, I won't be able to do this without you. And I know that Terry Harper had to be upset. But listen, Terry had a good show, and she showed why she's a very, very, very good boxer. So, yeah, I like I said, I know absolutely nothing about women's boxing, but giving props to Caroline Dubois for her win and claiming that title. Okay, and now this is a story which is a little bit sad. We did talk about this. I recollect it. We raised it, but here's the conclusion. We know that Philip Frakzek, I think that's how you pronounce his name, has been jailed for beating Franklin Agbetu to death in a savage and unprovoked attack in East London. Now, Philip Frakzek, who was asked to leave a block of flats on Plaistow Row in West Ham around 1 o'clock in the afternoon a couple of years ago, 15th of May, where he'd been trying multiple times to get into different doors and sleeping on the floor. He was told to leave. About 90 minutes later, he was confronted again by a 79-year-old Franklin Agbetu, who you see in the image. Neighbours soon heard banging and screams coming from Agbetu's flat and called the police. And he was found, this is the elder, with what police described as horrific injuries, and he died in hospital 5 days after the attack. Now, Philip Frakzek, who's now 22, of no fixed address, he did plead guilty to murder, and he was sentenced on Monday to life imprisonment on a minimum term of 20 years and 4 months. Now, Agbetu's children described their father as a man who lived a humble life grounded in integrity, respect and perseverance, education and faith, and said he was an active and valued member of his church community. In an impact statement, they said, "We continue to feel the absence of our father's kindness, his humour and his guidance, and the regular contact and reassurance he provided are no longer there, leaving a void in our daily lives." It's a tragic story, and this is the conclusion of that. This one is the final one for this section. It's a story of a former Channel 5 news presenter who has withdrawn her claim against Dan Walker, who was a co-host at the channel, after reaching a mutual agreement with the broadcaster, which is owned, incidentally, by PAMA and ITN. Now, the sister you can see in the image, Claudia Lisa van der Purgie, who hosted the show with Walker for a year between 2022 and 2023, had filed claims of unfair dismissal, discrimination, and harassment on grounds of race and sex and breach of contract. However, her lawyers said she can confirm that a mutual agreement has been reached with ITN and Channel 5 in respect of the matters subject to tribunal proceedings, and Claudia Lisa fully withdraws her allegation relating to Dan Walker and does not intend to repeat or pursue them. So the terms of the case, which was to be heard at an employment tribunal, were not made public. So I'm not going to try and speculate what's going on and the validity of the claims. All we know is that ITN and Channel 5 agreed to pay her an undisclosed amount to withdraw her tribunal with no admission of liability. So that's all I can say. The case was filed on the grounds of race and sex and breach of contract, unfair dismissal, discrimination and harassment. But it's now being settled. And that's it for that section. I'm just going to take a sip of water. Please forgive me. You are watching The Gaddy's Pan-African Community News Update. If you're watching live, you are welcome to interact with us through Facebook and YouTube. I can see there's some messages going online. I'm squinting to try and see them. Hotep Brother Toyin, welcome back. I missed you. Oh, so that's what I missed you too. Sorry I'm late as you overlap with Brother Katie. Yeah, it's good to be back in the hot seat and to have your support. I love Sweet Caroline Dubois. Oh, cool. Oh, kickboxer girl. Of course, we're going to have someone who's going to know a little bit about women's boxing. Okay, you should be our resident expert. Maybe we need a sports section so you can come on and kind of like keep us up to date on these kind of things. But yes, I'm going to keep going on. But we've got quite a lot to go through. The next section of the program is politics. And of course, this is the news from the last month and a bit while we've been away. I'm going to start off with a twist on what should really be a good story, actually. So the good news, as you probably heard, it is that the Green Party has made significant gains going forward, have kind of demolished the Labour Party in many ways. The downside, of course, is the growth of the Reform Party, and we'll touch on that later on. But we have been covering this particular story before the recent local elections, so we're going to continue following it so we don't take our eye off the ball. And this is because the Green Party is facing renewed scrutiny over allegations of racism and internal dysfunction after one of its senior members accused it of structural failings and a culture of retaliation. Now, this is completely different from the kind of like made up stuff around anti-Semitism, which has been politically exploited to attack its current leader. This is something that's been going on before then. And you may remember there was an open letter by Hamza Eagle, who's chair of the Global Majority Greens and convener of the Racism Policy Working Group. And he set out a series of claims spanning governments, disciplinary processes, and what he calls racialized harm within the Green Party. So now this group, the Global Majority Greens, which he chairs, is a grouping within the party made up majority of African and Asian members. And he says that the Green Party has a racism problem, not a perception problem, not a communication problem, but a racist problem or racism problem. And it's structural, documented, and sustained. And he's sent a letter to senior figures in the party, including Zach Palansky and CEO Harriet Lamb. And he alleges that the internal processes have been weaponized against members raising concerns, while anti-racism commitments agreed by the party members have gone unimplemented. So, I mean, I don't know all about the details. We've been covering this, and I'm going to continue to cover it, despite kind of like the good news around their growth in British politics. And it's important to understand that even the most liberal, leaning parties, those that seem like they don't have problems or seem like they're addressing racism, because the Green Party seems to be anti-racism. When it comes down to structural racism, no one gets away from us putting them under the microscope and see where the flaws are, because that's where we start to recognize things like Afrophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. Even though I don't want to talk about that now because it's being weaponized. But yes, this is particular story I want to share with this. The next story is one, and this was based on a poll which was done by the journalist Nadine White just before the recent election, and it identified that increasing numbers of African and Asian people in the UK are finding themselves politically engaged, but with nowhere to turn when it comes to voting. And this is part of the problem, and we're seeing essentially what's happened with these this cohort who feel that they're lost, that they're politically homeless, and they're moving to different sources. Some of them are actually going to reform on top of that, which is horrendous. But I didn't, if we're going to summarize this in the terms of the government, well, for the longest while, Labour was always seen as the natural home for people from minority ethnic backgrounds, and it used to have a 64% support amongst those communities, and it's dropped to 46%, and it's now even dropped even further. And so what's happening is that no one can take it for granted where people of African and Asian heritage are going to vote anymore. And that's something that's changing the shape of British politics. I'm not saying it's making the ultimate difference. I'm just saying it is influencing. the direction of British politics. And one scary way that it's influencing it, many of you would have seen the images of African people supporting reform and videos going around. It's the same thing like you had in America, where you had Latinos for Trump, blacks for Trump. That's what they called themselves, and various kind of like people who had no idea. Well, they did have an idea that the party was racist, but they didn't imagine that the person they elected would turn on them. Well, it's the same thing that's happening in the UK, and they're consistent. I mean, we spoke about this particular story where the housing spokesperson for Reform, one Simon Dudley, was investigated after he made some horrendous comments about the Grenfell massacre. And, some comment about, well, everyone dies in the end. He kind of trivialized it. Well, to its credit, Reform, he investigated him, and they've said that he's no longer a spokesperson for the party. I don't know if that means it kicks him out, but he's not in that particular role. They probably kept him and it's shuffled him around somewhere. But that's the story there. If we look at Reform, though, and this is one of the horrible things about this, it's like when we look at politics and racism, they're all kind of blurred into one. Nigel Farage, who is obviously the leader of Reform, has said now that the party would deny new visas to people from countries seeking reparations from the UK for African enslavement if it formed the next government. And this is a real veiled threat. This is saying, and this is in the wake of the United Nations resolution that recognises slavery on Ma'afa as a crime against humanity. So Nigel Farage saying that if we become the government, anyone applying from a country that is talking about reparations would instantly be banned from a visa, including ones for visitors and work, is outrageous and so xenophobic. I'm not going to continue expanding on that story. There's a lot of stuff I could say. I don't want to give it option of air. All I will say, however, is that the Conservative Party leader, Kenny Badenoch, is kind of like broadly in line with this policy. She hasn't said that she's going to do the same thing with a ban, but she is just saying that she's opposed to reparations, and she feeds into that narrative which says that this is something that happened in the past and that we shouldn't even be talking about it. So there is no difference really between the Conservative Party of today and the Reform Party. They are, despite Conservatives being led by an African woman, they are the same. There's not much difference between them. One is just very honest about its blatant racism, and the other one is partially honest about its blatant racism. And when we talk about blatant racism, we have this from, I don't even like to call it by its name, because it calls itself GB News, but it's not a news broadcast. It's a propaganda organization. It's not interested in news. So what you can see here on the screen is an image of Sophie Cochrane, who's a right-wing media commentator. And she's decided to waste our time and money and, by taking a charity that organizes internships for African and minority ethnic people to call, because they do not organize schemes for Europeans. So this is the kind of stupidity that these kind of organizations are doing. So there's a program called the 1000 Interns, and this foundation was running this with the Bar Council, and she applied as an applicant, even though she knew it was specific to help increase diversity in the bar. And she says that, I was shocked to discover that the scheme is restricted to applicants of particular racial background. And so she's going to sue, claiming that she has faced loss of employment opportunity as she is racialized as white, and it's discrimination under the basis of the Equality Act. And this is kind of like the most stupidest thing ever. But this sort of stunts, waste our time, waste our resources, and just steers up hatred, Afrophobic hatred, Islamophobic hatred, against all other minorities, just so that they can kind of seize power. She says that she's been exploring a legal career, even though she's actually on GB News. So, it's complete nonsense. I think the only comparison to this kind of stupidity I can think of, it's kind of like having a scheme to support people who are visually challenged, and in saying that I applied to the scheme, but because there's nothing wrong with my eyes, and I've got 20/20 vision. They discriminate against me, and discrimination against someone who's on the basis of disability is illegal. And I'm a person with non-disability, so therefore I should not be discriminated. It's absolutely insane. But of course, I'm tied up having to talk about this. This is going to go through the courts. This will go through the papers and the news and the media, and it will damage other organisations. It will put them off. Those who don't have the guts to see these really good schemes through, it will stop them from actually running these programs because they'll be fearful of negative publicity. So I just wanted to kind of like give you some thinking points around that. Yeah, it just makes me sick. Talking about making me sick, Kemi Badenoch, we just spoke about her, the leader of the Conservative Party. Now, she's called for Axel Rudakabuna and his parents to be deported if they don't face criminal action. And this is after the public inquiry that found that they could have, as they say could have, prevented the Southport attack. I think that there's a stretching of the truth here. Now, for those of you who don't remember him, Rudakabana was the man who murdered the three girls, Alice, Bebby, and Elsie, who were 9, 6, and 7 at the Taylor Swift dance workshop in 2024. I think everyone, just condemned this universally. Everyone said it. It doesn't matter that. I mean, we knew he had mental health issues. Well, some of us knew he had mental health issues, but we condemned that attack. There's no one in their right mind who would say that what he did was justified or was anything like that. He also tried to murder 8 other children and the class instructor at this space. And this is horrible. He's serving a life sentence with a minimum term of 52 years, and he's been tried. He's incarcerated. But there was an inquiry, and it resulted in around 700 pages of documentation around it. And one of the things that the inquiry chairman said, this is Adrian Fulford, he said that Rudakabana would not have been free to kill had his parents done what they morally ought to have done. And this is a really dodgy line to take down, because now what's happened is that Badenoch is saying that they should be deported if they don't face criminal action. And so she's trying to blame the parents for the sins of the son. And, as much as I personally wish that the parents had kind of like intervened or said something, they're not responsible for their son's actions. And trying to sort of whip up the negative emotion, because this is what led, I don't remember, to the race riots that took place across the UK, whipping that up to score political points is the most morally vacuous and repugnant thing that you can do. But of course, it's the Tory party. And they know there's a lot of anger about the Southport attack. It was used to kind of like this, to drive this anti-immigrant sentiment. And I thought I'd just share with you, because that's where we're at in modern Britain today. Ooh, okay, so you are watching, let me put up the screen and so I can get a sippy, not just see me gulping water down. You are watching Legali's Pan-African Community News Update. If you're listening, like, give me 1 second, hold on. Yes, you're watching Legali's Pan-African Community News Update. If you're watching live, you're working to interact with us through Facebook or YouTube. It's automatically going up. I'm looking at the comments. Yes, brother, let's not give Reform airspace. Yeah, I know. I don't want to give them airspace. And thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, I have to cover what's taking place and how it affects us, but not in a way that promotes them. So I'll try to narrow the time around. But unfortunately, they make up a lot of the news, and it's irritating. And a lot of our community are kind of ignorant to the implications of what's happening, trajectory, what's happening in the political world. But of course, if you want to drop your chat, share it. They're automatically coming on screen, so you're welcome to kind of like make your comments, and they'll just pop up. And I'll always at these breaks kind of like take a look to see if I can quickly scan them. But I'm going to go on to the next section, which is about UK policing. And let's see if I can get that going. Okay, so a few years back, excuse me. A few years back, I think I know I spoke about the National Police Race Action Plan because I was planning to work on it. An independent police report has now found that promises by police chiefs to tackle racial bias has failed owing to a lack of clear national leadership. And so you might remember that this report came about over 5 years ago in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. And there was when people saw how uh, uh, oh my God, my brain's just frozen. My brother who had the boot on his neck. Oh my God, that's incredible. It's gone. That's amazing. George Floyd. Wow, I'm getting old. Okay, so after the murder of George Floyd in the States during lockdown, the Black Lives Matter movement took this topic international. And in the UK, the police started to kind of like look internally and said that, look, we need to do something. And so they decided to set up a race action plan. And they were going to tackle the stigmatizing and humiliating experience of African people at the hands of officers. And these were their words, stigmatizing and humiliating. Well, after those 5 years, after lots of paperwork, lots of meetings, the Independent Scrutiny and Oversight Board, which monitored progress on the action plan, published a report and said there'd be no meaningful impact. And I don't want to say this was inevitable. It's horrific. The National Black Police Association said it had been a £10 million failure. So, I mean, this is just so you understand the background. All of the police forces said that they're going to contribute to this. They're going to do something. The report is saying that even though they made all the right noises, there was a complete lack of national leadership to make any changes. So they spent this £10 million. And even the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council said progress had been less than he expected. But what they identified was that there was resistance from heads in the force, and that resistance had been substantial. Now, we spoke about our sister Abimbola Johnson, who was the chair of the ISOB, that's the Independent Scrutiny and Oversight Board. And she said 5 years ago, policing committed to improving the outcomes for African communities. That commitment has not been met. Progress has been slow, uneven, and too dependent on individual effort rather than institutional change. And we see this time and time again. I mean, I often focus on the Metropolitan Police, we're based in London, but all over the UK, we see they focus on individual officers, the rotten apple theory, rather than recognizing that the barrel is so rotten to the core that any apple that goes inside it gets corroded. That's what needs to happen. And so the report that came out says that one of the biggest blocks has been the culture inside policing. And it reads that internal police culture is the most significant barrier to progress. And external framework is incapable of overcoming a culture that does not want to change. Now, I don't completely agree with that assessment. I do think an external framework can overcome a culture that does not want to change, but has to do it in partnership with those within that culture that want to change. But the point is clearly made. The police didn't stop being racist because they don't want to stop being racist. This is not just the Met now. This is the police forces across the UK. And we can substantiate that claim. I mean, this report came out last month, because what we also know is that there are more than 350 race-related complaints made to a pair of police forces after they declared themselves institutionally racist, and not a single one resulted in an officer being sacked in 2 years. So you've got to get that right. 350 race-related complaints, okay? Just two forces. They admitted that they're institutionally racist, but not a single officer was sacked. Now, of course, you can say, maybe the threshold wasn't met, but Police Scotland and Avon and Somerset Constabulary made headlines when they said that they were institutionally racist in 2023. They were the first forces in Britain to publicly say that the term referring to systemic discrimination rather than individual acts of racism had been applied to the police, or the British police, as early as 1999 by the Macpherson report into the Metropolitan Police. But no force before Police Scotland had applied it to themselves. So this was a groundbreaking thing when they came out and said that. But yet they made these statements, and you look at the data, and this is data from not as recent as 2025. Since then, no officers have been sacked. Over 194 complaints made to Police Scotland and 166 complaints made to Avon and Somerset. Now, with most complaints, they were dismissed. Some were dealt with internal processes known as assurances and learning from reflection, and others were withdrawn. Now, of course, I'm not one to say that some cases require, I don't like saying training or, or learning from reflection or whatever it is. I understand, right? People make mistakes. Depending on the gravity of the racism, it's kind of like, the approach is always going to be subjective. I just think that if you have 350 complaints, I would expect it at least in a rational world. I'd expect at least 50, maybe 100 officers perhaps would face being sacked or see as disciplinary action. And if they messed up again, they'd be gone. That's not the case. Not a single one. Institutionally racist. None of the complaints to Police Scotland appear to have led to formal misconduct proceedings. While just one report, one from a member of the public about Avon and Somerset was escalated in this way. Out of the 350, only one was escalated. And not because a police officer saw one of their colleagues acting in a racist way and reported them. It came from a member of the public. There's something rotten to the core in British policing. And you want an example of why this irritates me when I read these kind of stories. Well, let's come to somewhere a bit more familiar. Let's come back to London and talk about the Metropolitan Police. And what you may not know is that 6 Metropolitan Police officers are being investigated after an African child suffered a broken knee during a stop and search in North London. Now, the boy, who was aged 16 at the time, was forced off his electric bike by an officer over concerns about his behaviour as he rode along Northumberland Park in Tottenham. And this was in 2025. Now, the IOPC, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, launched an investigation last November, and they looked at the level of force that was used. They checked whether race or the child's age was a factor in the treatment of him, and the aftercare that was provided to him. So these are the good things to check for. Now, the Met, which said the allegations were concerning, made a mandatory referral to the IOPC of a complaint on behalf of the boy about his treatment by officers. And I say it's important to understand that the Met sometimes make these referrals by themselves, because those who are victims of police brutality are often too scared to make complaints. And so it's good that we're now getting a situation where the police are self-referring. But of course, when you're self-referring, sometimes you're framing the complaint in your own language. It doesn't seem to be done in this case, but just be mindful of that. So what are the facts now? Well, we know that nothing was found in the search before the officers removed the battery from his electric bike and told him he could leave. But what we also know is that they returned a short time later and arrested him on suspicion of racially aggravated public order and threats to kill and dangerous driving. This is a 16-year-old boy. Now, the officers attempted to take him into custody, but this was refused, and they were told to take him to hospital where he was diagnosed with a fractured knee. Now, since January of this year, 3 police constables are being criminally investigated. 1 officer for potential offences of assault occasioning grievously bodily harm or actually bodily harm, and the other 2 for intentionally encouraging or assisting an offence which is contrary to Section 4 of the Serious Crimes Act. They're also being investigated for potentially gross misconduct. And there's another 3 police constables investigated for potential misconduct in relation to alleged failures to challenge the conduct of the other officers and their treatment of the boy. So taking this whole story, like at face value, what's happening here. So a young 16-year-old is stopped, let go, they come and arrest him, they break his knee, try and lock him up, not allowed to lock him up, goes to hospital, and then we find out that actually it looks like there's no grounds, but we don't have enough information on that. But we do know that nothing was found in the search, nothing. So that's happened. And then now the officers are saying, okay, we're going to investigate a few of the officers for using too much force. But what is positive, I suppose, is that there's a looking into the officers who didn't complain about the use of excess force. Where's this going to land? I don't know. Probably the same ways it landed in Scotland and Avon and Somerset with no further action against police officers. But this is what's taking place, 2026. Let me move on. Because you think that an abuse of children is a one-off. Some people say, oh, this is so rare, it doesn't really happen. Well, just let me remind you that when it comes to African children, there are people out there who think that our babies are superhuman, that they have superhuman strength, and that they're so unprotected by us, their parents, that they can do anything to them and get away with them. So in this particular case, there's a British Transport Police officer who's been handed a final written warning following an investigation by the Independent Office of Police Conduct again, because he he engaged in a practice at London Bridge underground station when he started. How can I explain it? He located two African 15-year-old boys, and he had next to no information, very limited information, but he immediately was told, like, you know what I mean, like, you know, there's these 15 guys that, we don't know what the words were, they were acting shady or whatever it was. So he immediately took out his baton and ordered the boys on the ground. Now, without giving them any opportunity to cooperate, he started using force. Without explaining to the children why they were required to obey his instructions, he struck one of the children with his baton less than 30 seconds after first encountering them. And then he struck the other one with the baton less than 1 minute after encountering them. Both of them were arrested and put in handcuffs. So picture that, right? Picture that. That's your son. That's your nephew. It's my son, whatever it is. Because someone has made a complaint. Oh, those two young boys are looking a bit shifty. PC Plod runs to action, pulls out his baton. Get on the floor. You know, what's going on? 30 seconds, he hits one of them. Within a minute, he hits the other one, and then he arrests them. Now, two members of the public who witnessed the interaction made complaints, and they were outraged with the amount of force that they used, and they alleged that the children were treated differently because of their ethnicity, because they were racialized as black. And while a further police complaint was made by the mother of one of the children. Now, when a disciplinary hearing concluded, the panel found that the officer used force against the two children that was not necessary, proportionate, or reasonable in the circumstances, and that he failed to treat the children with respect and courtesy, and that he arrested them without sufficient grounds to do so. He was also found to have breached police standards of professional behaviour relating to authority, respect and courtesy, use of force, orders and instruction, duties and responsibilities, and discreditable conduct. And the panel found the allegations that the children were found and treated differently because of their ethnic background not proven. So that there's no way to say that the panel found that he acted outrageously, but they weren't willing to say that he acted that way because they're racialized as black. Now, what happened to PC Parsons? Well, PC Parsons was given a final warning, and that warning is going to last for around 5 years. Why is that? It's not Metropolitan. It's the police council, police transport police. Why is he still a police officer? Why is he still on the force? How is that? How does that happen? This is British policing 2026. I'm not gonna. This is the last one, and I'm gonna be very quick with this one because those kind of things irritate me. This we do every year. I'll do it again. I'm going to try and do it in like less than 30 seconds because I can't be bothered. African children are 8 times more likely to be strip searched by the police than their European peers. Stripped search. Yeah, and that is as bad as it sounds. There was a new report. It outlines that the number of children strip search has more than halved in 4 years, which is good since Child Q. But it warns that ethnic disparities persist and calls into question the use of force in some cases. Now, this is reports coming from the Child Commissioner, Rachel de Souza. And she said that African children were almost 5 times as likely to be subject to force during stop and search than European counterparts. And the National Police Chief Council has said that the updates to official guidelines on stop and search, which are out for public consultation, will ensure a child-centered approach was taken by police officers. Does anyone believe that? Does anyone believe that we need another consultation? And when this consultation is resolved by the National Police Chiefs Council, that the police will now engage in a child-centered approach? Because I don't believe in that. I don't believe that at all. I think we've known all these statistics. I think a few months ago I spoke about, they did some research into the use of dogs on African people, and they found that the police are quicker to release animals to harm African people than anyone of any other ethnic background. But, you know, every year we have these statistics, and it's my duty to report them. I'm going to move on from that story. That's the end of that section, thankfully. You are watching the Galleys Pan-African Community News Update. As ever, if you're watching live, you're free to interact with us through Facebook, YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share if you find this broadcast useful. And the next section, as if I wasn't talking about this already, is a review of expressions of white supremacy and violent Afrophobia, racism, basically, in the UK and around the UK over the last month and a bit. I've just talked about it in politics. I talked about it in policing. These are the more overt. And of course, if I'm going to talk about Afrophobia and white supremacy, unfortunately, I have to start off with that messy political party reform. I won't spend much time. You will know that they won like a landslide amount of seats in the local elections, taking like many seats from Labour Party. Just one heads up, there's a reform candidate. His name is Glenn Gibbons. He's a new councillor for Milton Castle Ward in Sunderland. He just one of the few who won, kind of like I think it's 1,400 new reform council seats across the country. Yeah, he's now a councillor. And one of the things he said was that Nigerians should be melted down to fill in the potholes. Now, I mean, there's lots of other stuff he said, but this whole idea that a councillor who's now elected with power in the local authority in Sunderland actually believes that you find African people of Nigerian heritage, dismember them, and then stuff their bodies into potholes, and they think this is a funny joke. Ha ha, very funny. Ha 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 ha. This is the world that we are now in. I'm going to leave it there. Glenn Gibbons, I'm sure there'll be far more ugly stuff coming from this guy's mouth in the weeks and months to come. Okay, now how does this really impact on people's everyday lives? Well, when you have all this anti-immigration rhetoric and this extreme racism, you have the case of this Gladys Ijeoma-Kanu, who's the daughter of Bishop Lucius Uzudike, who's one of the first African Anglican bishops in Nigeria, who came to Britain in the 1970s at the age of 16 to join her parents. And she's had her status reinstated following a battle with the Home Office. So on one level, this is good news. The fact that, she fought the Home Office for her status. Her father traveled to the UK in 1944, where he studied theology at the University of Oxford, who's granted settlement. But, the fact that she had to go through this fight in the first place, and it only occurred after key documentation confirming his status was lost following his death in 1998, is outrageous. You see, despite her building her life in Britain, she was required to apply under the Windrush scheme to confirm her right to remain. And this raised fears about her status in the UK. So, I mean, it's just bizarre, right? Well, I say bizarre. Again, this is institutional racism. Her application was submitted in January 2026. It set out decades of continuous residence, professional contribution, and deep-rooted ties in the UK. And like I said, thankfully, she's won her battle. But many people do not win their battle. In her case, the decision dated the 15th of April 2026, they confirmed that she's been granted indefinite leave to remain, recognising that she had entered into the country before the 1st of January 1973. But while her status has been resolved, her case also highlights how some what they call Commonwealth citizens who arrived in the UK before 1973 are still required to evidence their right to remain decades later, particularly where the official records have been lost or, as we know, destroyed. So again, this is kind of like if you want to understand what's going on and how white supremacy works, where it destroys boarding cards of people who travelled from the Caribbean into the UK, when it puts grandmothers and elders into a situation where they're continuously having to prove that they have a right to stay here, despite paying taxes and contributing to the nation. Something's rotten. Something is deeply rotten with the system. The next story, just to give you a heads up on how this can turn the wrong way, is a case of a 72-year-old elder who, he's lived in the UK for over, or nearly, I should say, 3 decades, and how he passed away because he was unable to access his immigration status because the government shifted to a digital-only system. Now, our elder, Robert White, lost his job, his income and stability after his biometric residence permit expired, and he was unable to navigate the transition to an online-only immigration system. And I don't know what you think, but I think it's incredibly cruel to expect a 70-year-old elder to try and work out how to use an online-only immigration system after being in the country for 30 years and contributing. Now, his solicitor said his death was not an unfortunate coincidence, but the foreseeable result of a system that failed to protect an elderly man who had lived and contributed to this country for 29 years. He'd been living in the UK since the 1990s, working and building a life while on a 10-year route to settlement. And towards the end of his life, he was based in Wembley. Like many migrants, he was required to renew his leave every 30 months at significant cost. The government fleeces these elders. They fleece them for money to prove and to stay and to get remain to leave. But when the Home Office moved to this digital system, this took a really sinister twist because his physical proof of status expired. The card, the documentation that had been fine was no longer valid, leaving him effectively locked out. And I don't want to say a twist of fate because, he was admitted to hospital early in April. He was diagnosed with sepsis and pneumonia, and he joined the ancestors shortly afterwards. So his last days, the government made it hell for him, made it hell. And this was completely avoidable. So when we talk about these kind of systems, this immigration, anti-immigration, anti-migrant, anti-asylum seekers, continuously on and on, it has a real impact. And when people talk about the Windrush scandal and the Windrush compensation scheme and saying people are being paid, or what do you mean it's taking too long? No, people are dying without justice. People are joining the ancestors. People are being pushed into situations where their health deteriorates. They're being killed by this system. Okay, this one's a strange story. This is, how do I say it? You can see the image of the diary of Samuel Pepys, and almost exactly 360 years after he chronicled the Great Fire of London, what we now find out, or what researchers are finding out, is that he actually erased in creative correspondence he'd received to conceal the fact that he'd been offered an enslaved boy as a bride. It's a bizarre story, right? So, there's a historian in Cambridge University, Michael Edwards. He consulted hundreds of records to look into this. And he found out that one of the most unsettling details of the study was this bribe, this human bribe by a senior naval officer in the 1670s. And I say this because you often hear about, people like Badenoch and, or the Farage say, well, the British stopped slavery. Why do you need reparations? We're the ones who kind of freed all the African people. Well, here's evidence now, straight out evidence that what happened was that Samuel Pepys was literally told to accept a small enslaved boy. The words are, "I brought home on board for your honor, hoping he is so well seasoned to endure the cold weather as to live in England," as a gift for him to continue his work chronicling British history. Now, Pepys, to his credit, and I say minor credit with a small c, wrote back rejecting the offer. But Edward argues that this wasn't because of any ethical concerns about slavery. No, that wasn't the reason why he rejected the offer. But he didn't want the optics of looking like a man who could be bribed. That was the problem. So that's why he pushed back, because Pepys was also involved in arranging the loan of naval ships to the Royal African Company, and that is the organisation that was actively engaged in the crime of enslaving African people. So this is kind of like the context. So this is the historical side to some of these narratives that we don't often hear about. Next story for you is one that we've been talking about for quite a while.
Hi, Toyin.
Oleander.
Yes, I'm here. Yes. So I just wanted to, I'm sorry about all the previous comments. I can't really read all of those out now, but there's one from Kickboxer Gal that's just come through. Facts, brother, 100%, the usual suspects. Judgment is on the horizon.
Okay, I'm not sure which story that is.
The one you've just done. I'm assuming it's the one you've just done about the enslavement of, that's what I'm assuming.
Okay.
But I mean, it's true where we're looking at these times right now where we know that people are trying to hide their connections with the enslavement of our people, but all the facts are coming out, and so we know that there's going to be loads of them coming out of the woodworks, finding out so much about these evil people. She also says, yes, the mistreatment of our elders.
That story. I mean, can you imagine that? Kind of like, just living, working, paying tax, contributing to the nation for so long, and then invalidating the documentation so that you're forced to go through an online system. I mean, how many elders do you know can use smartphones? They actually have a whole category of phones, which are massive buttons and stuff, which they simplify because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Or?
No. I'm just trying.
Okay. Let me see if I could pull up the slide. We seem to have lost it. Let me see if. No. Okay. That's bizarre. At the stage, and there we go. And hopefully, okay, we're back. Okay, give thanks. Now, next story. We've talked about this for quite some time. This is not going to be much of a surprise. It's just going to give you some more contextual information. When I say we're talking about a story for some time, let me be clear about the risk of African women more likely to die during childbirth in the UK. It's not just the UK, actually. It's across the Western world, but I'm talking about the UK. Now, there has been some more research. There's continuous research on this phenomenon. And the latest research has said that stress from racism and deprivation could also explain why African women are more likely to die during childbirth. Now, what happened was that researchers reviewed 44 existing studies, but what they did is that they looked at those that were examining three physiological pathways associated with the worst pregnancy outcomes. And so that's oxidative stress, inflammation, and uteroplacenta vascular resistance. And they found that African women had higher levels of the three metrics. So what they said is that physiological differences are not the result of genetic differences. It's not something that they're born. So it's not something that because you're African, you're more predisposed towards this. According to researchers, they suggest that the research shows that social environmental stresses such as systemic racism and deprivation, which are known to have a measurable biological effect, may influence the body's ability to function healthily during pregnancy. Now, this research was coming out of the University of Cambridge. One of the first authors on this is Grace Amador, and she said that pregnancy and childbirth put great stress on a woman's body. She says that African women may experience additional strain due to factors including systemic racism, socioeconomic disadvantage, and environmental stresses. So just being here in the UK, exposed to those stresses, actually puts your body in a position where it can't function at its best during pregnancy. It's a very interesting hypothesis, because right now, as we know, African women in the UK are 2.7 times more likely to die during childbirth compared with their European counterparts. And they're also more likely to experience serious birth complications and prenatal mental health illnesses, or, straight after they're given birth. So African babies are also twice as likely to be born stillborn compared with their European counterparts. So these maternal kind of disparities and problems are not genetic. I think this is what this research is starting to lead towards. And we need more research looking into this. I think many of us suspect this anyway. We don't think there's something different. African people have been giving birth for time immemorial. The human race couldn't survive without African women giving birth. But the fact that those of us who are living inside Western societies where we experience the stress of racism and socioeconomic deprivation, that putting our bodies, obviously I'm a man, but putting female bodies into a tradition where they can't function at their best, it's a very interesting hypothesis, and I'm definitely going to keep an eye out on that. The next story is this is okay. You might be thinking, why is this one in the racism category and white supremacy category? Okay, I'll have to read it and share it with you and unpack it a little bit. There's actually going to be an overhaul of the General Medical Council when it comes to dealing with doctors who face accusations of racism and anti-Semitism on social media. Now, what's happening is that the Department of Health and Social Care has launched a consultation on changes to legislation governing the regulation of doctors, saying that perhaps they should be struck off. And this is going to lead to the biggest reform of medical, the biggest reform of the medical regulator in 4 decades. Now, many people be like, well, hold on, isn't that good news? You're saying that doctors who engage in accusations, who are accused of accusations of racism and anti-Semitism on social media are likely to be struck off, and this will be now part of the law. Well, let me keep reading, because the line is that when it comes to expressions of anti-Zionist and pro-Palestinian views, this is expected to be a continuing point of contention. So what the Department of Health and Social Care is saying is that there have been too many recent examples of doctors using racist and anti-Semitic language, particularly on social media, without swift action. I don't know if you're hearing what they're saying, but this is coming from the Labour peer John Manson, who was commissioned to perform a rapid review of anti-Semitism and other forms of racism in the NHS. What they're saying is that if a doctor is expressing anti-Zionist ideas and pro-Palestinian ideas, then this is a form of racism. This is a form of anti-Semitism. This is what the assertion is. And if they do that, then it should be easier to struck them off the medical register because they are engaging in racist practice. Now, there's something very dangerous with conflating those ideas and make them into laws. This is part of the reason why the Labour Party got such a big kick in during the local elections, because it's really messing around with topics that it just shouldn't be doing with. And I think Diane Abbott kind of clumsily talks about this hierarchy of racism, this kind of like where some forms of oppression are treated as far more serious than others. And going through doctors' social media, like threads, and looking for where they express solidarity with Palestine, for example, and then saying that's sufficient to be racist, and then therefore we're going to dismiss you. What can I say? Anyway, again, we'll keep our eye on this, but this is a Labour initiative. Okay, what's next? Okay. Actor Papa Esidu has revealed that he's facing threats from racists after being cast as Professor Severus Snape in the upcoming Harry Potter television series. Some of the messages say things like, quit or I'll murder you. I'm laughing because it's absolutely ridiculous. The backlash is because basically he's an African playing a role which was originally played by a European, in this case, Alan Rickman, in the Harry Potter film, the Sorcerer's Stone. I can't even, what can I say? I mean, the good thing is that he's saying the abuse fuels me and makes me more passionate about making this character my own, because I think of how I felt as a kid. And, it's a good attitude to have. Don't let them beat you down. But no one during their professional work life should expect to encounter that level of abuse because he's taken on a new role. I mean, it's just outrageous. This is a sort of thing where we're normalizing abuse. We're saying that, well, what can this is to be expected, right? I'm taking on this role. We're living in the UK. There's going to be racists making death threats against me. It's not normal to live a life where you're getting death threats. That is not acceptable. And I hope that whoever's in charge of protecting the cast and looking after them is doing a good job and scrutinizing the social media comments and reporting to the authorities. Not that they'll probably do enough to make sure that he's protected. But that's that story. The next one is a strange one. You probably heard this one. It made all the major headlines. There was a festival that was due. The Wireless Festival was due to take place this summer, and its headline act was Kanye West. Many of you know that I'm not a fan. He made some very derogatory comments, not just about Jewish people and anti-Semitic, but he also made some extremely disrespectful comments about Africans, saying that slavery was a choice. Now, many people in our community like to let him off the hook and say he's got mental health issues, and so this is why he's doing it. But in this particular case, the British government refused permission for him to travel to the UK after a backlash, and this is specifically because of the outrage that was caused when he made some vile anti-Semitic, racist, and pro-Nazi comments. And I don't have a problem with that. There's something about censorship that I am uncomfortable about. I mean, I don't believe in censorship, and I'm more annoyed that the organisers of the Wireless Festival actually chose him as a headliner. So they were platforming someone who they know is actually shared racist views. But that's a different question. The fact that the government decided to stop him from coming in and not grant him a visa because he'd made comments that were anti-Semitic. Again, it's frustrating, because what you start to see is that hierarchy coming back in place. Anyway, I mean, this is it. So he's not going to be coming. People who bought the tickets are probably going to have to get some refunds. I think they've already done that. It's a news story. It goes under the white supremacy section, because even though clearly anti-Semitism is another form of racism, all of the things that Kanye West said should have been justification for that decision, if that's the route you was going to take, not just because he picked on a particular group that you feel needed extra protection, when all of the groups should have equal protection. So it's a bit of a messy story, but it's something I just thought I should share. Okay. Now, this is we spoke about this story a few months ago. This was a Desmond Jadu. He's a Birmingham Council candidate who stood in the local elections, and he was speaking out about being subjected to racist abuse and intimidation during his election campaign. Now, he's sustained threats online, offline, in person since announcing his candidacy. He believes he's singled out because he's the only candidate from a minority ethnic background among the 12 people contesting the seat, and this is in Kingstanding. Now, his threats have included death threats by phone, and I could go on and on and on. There's videos around besmirching him. Now, unfortunately, he didn't win the election. I don't know much about his politics. I don't know him at all. He didn't win. But what I do know is that the Reform Party won both seats in his constituency, and they didn't just win by a little margin. I think it was something like he got 140 votes, and they got 1,400 votes each. So Reform is making some serious gains. And people who are saying that they're anti-racist, I mean, he's supposed to be a long-standing community activist. I've not heard any bad things about him. They're being marginalized right now. So this is something that we have to keep an eye out. There's a change taking place. It's been here for a long time. And I think if you see the scale with which Reform won these local elections, I think it's quite apparent that the UK is speaking loudly and clearly that it wants to embrace its racist roots, just like America did. Because I think I tried to do a calculation of how many votes went to the Conservatives, how many votes went to Reform. And even with my rough statistics, we're looking at just under 40% of the nation voted for a racist party. 40%. I think it's even higher than that, but I had to do this before I came online, and I was just trying to get some statistics. But it was at least 40% of the nation that voted, I should say, said that they wanted racists in power. So, bear that in mind. Okay, I'm going to close with this story, and this is just kind of linked to the Kanye West story again. It's a bit messy. It means people will try and cancel me and all that kind of stuff, but I'm just bringing the facts. So there was a horrific attack in Golders Green where this man, Esther Suleiman, attacked innocent bystanders with a knife. Thankfully, no one was killed. And the information is starting to drip out. And when it was first reported, you probably saw the news about this anti-Semitic attack, and he attacked these two Jews on the street. He'd seen one in Highfield Avenue as he was leaving the synagogue. And, he stabbed him, and he stabbed another one who was waiting at the bus stop. And these were elders. So, well, not elders. One was 34, the other one was 36. These are, outrageous and horrific. And all of us were kind of like, oh my gosh, it was kind of that moment there. And there was a level of solidarity. It's like, when the president came out, not the president, the prime minister came out, Cobra meeting, we've got to stop, stamp out anti-Semitism. And everyone was kind of like, what, this is outrageous. No one should be frightened of walking down the streets. Now, that's not changed. There needs to be protection of anyone who faces racist attack, especially that kind of level of violence. I think what's really peed people off is that we now know that before he stabbed the two Jewish people, he'd actually previously, at the same day, stabbed a Muslim. Now, this guy, Ismail Hussein, who he actually had known for some time, was stabbed at 7:50 in the morning. So he went to his house. When he opened the door, he tried to stab him. That was the first attack on that day. But I think what pees everyone off, or everyone who kind of like wants a level of parity when it comes to dealing with racism in the UK, is that it wasn't reported. This was framed straight away as a terrorist attack against Jews. And we saw the news going on and on and on, marginalizing and erasing the trauma and the horrific attack on Ismail Hussein. And I think that's the problem. There was also a second thing as well that took place with this particular story. And none of this is excusing the actions of Esther Solomon. Even though he had mental health issues, he's been living in supported housing. No one is saying that what he did was right. No one's saying that. I'm certainly not saying that. But what we also saw was evidence of, we saw the video footage of the police kind of like incapacitating him. And if you watch that video, they tasered him, and no one's got a problem with that. And he had the weapon, the knife in his hand, right? And he was holding, he was clenching, he wouldn't let go of it. And so one of the officers kicked him in the head. He still held on to it. And then he kicked him in the head again. Now, the guy was on the floor tasered, and then he kicked him in the head again. That's 3 times he kicked him in the head. He wouldn't let go. And so he kicked him in the head again. This is the police officer. And he was still holding on to it. Bear in mind, he was on the floor tasered, and there was now police officer, and they kicked him in the head again. And then they released the knife. And, no one, I think most of us are happy that there was no fatalities in this particular case. But I struggle with this argument that we cannot scrutinize police conduct when apprehending a suspect involved in a crime, even if it's a violent crime, when they've been tasered, when there are police officers holding them down and they're on the floor. And a kick to the head, repeatedly kicking to the head, it kind of invoked the Charles de Mendes thing for me, when he was sitting on the tube and they said that he was a terrorist with bombs, and there was wires coming out of his belt, and they shot him repeatedly in the head. Now, of course, it's not the same case, but the fact is that we have to be able to scrutinize police actions in these highly charged times. And what happened with this particular case, for those of you who don't know, is that there was a journalist, I think it was Owen Jones, who kind of like made a comment about it, saying like, I've seen that video. That doesn't look like the way policing should take place, even in a situation like this. And I think it was Zach Polanski, the Green leader, who kind of like liked it and said something about it. And they came in on him and said that he was anti-Semitic. And then something extraordinary happened after that. Not only did they say that a Jewish man, because Zach Polanski is Jewish, is anti-Semitic, which is just nonsense here. The Metropolitan Police Chief, Mark Rowley, came out and made this overtly political statement, saying that he was back in his office, that he shouldn't have been talking, and it led to Zach Polanski having to apologize for even daring to question the excess use of police force in taking a suspect into custody. This is outrageous situation, but this is what happened. I'm probably giving you too much details, but this is, again, I'm sharing all this stuff for you because right now it's like, it's all died down. But when we look back at history and we start looking at these clues and these signs of what's going on, and we start seeing that, we hear that phrase that reformists use, 2-tier policing. And they use it to say that different people get different kinds of levels of policing. But no one really looks at it from the perspective of those of us in minority communities, how we get a lack of policing, how we are over policed and under protected. And when the police use excessive force on someone, and I'm not defending his actions, but when he's excessive, even to dare question it is seen as we're doing something wrong. Despite all the evidence that we have of past behaviours, 350 complaints of racist abuse in Scotland and Avon and Somerset over 2 years, and not a single Met officer let go or fired. Police officers abusing young children and not even being suspended. So, I mean, sorry about the long-winded explanation, but that's my job, to kind of contextualize these complicated cases. That's what's taking place. Please keep an eye, because this story's been buried now. It's going to move forward. He'll go to jail and we'll stop talking about it. But we must keep an eye on the police. We must keep an eye on the politicians. And more importantly, increasingly, this is what Legali was set up to do, we must keep an eye on the media reporting of these situations, because it continuously frames the narratives in a way that harms us, that we are unaware of what's really going on. And we start spouting ignorant statements because we are uninformed about what is really taking place. That's the last one for this section. I'm going to move on. You are watching Legali's Pan-African Community News Update.
Hello. Hi.
It annoys me. If you're watching live, hi, Sister Oleander.
Hi. Okay, so Shwazel one says they kept that quiet about him stabbing the Muslim man in Golders Green prior to the stabbing of the Jewish people. Absolutely.
Yeah, that was completely off. They kept completely out of the radar. We had no idea that was going on, and I don't think those things are accidental. So that's why I kind of wanted to unpack that. Most people, and I'd say even to this day, most people are unaware. That. Now,
absolutely.
The only thing.
I said absolutely,
because the story. Yeah, the story doesn't. It's not as sexy. That's the term they're using. It's not as sexy talking about the fact that in the same morning he'd stabbed a Muslim beforehand. Oh no, because then you can't say it's a terrorism. You can't say it's anti-Semitic. You can't say he had mental health issues. But yes, he stabbed his friend, who's. I mean, that's if I say friend, someone he knew. I shouldn't say friend. I don't know the relationship. But he knew the person.
Yeah,
that helps us. We need the honesty. We need the truth from our public officials, not these curated stories. But that whole Cobra, kind of having a Cobra meeting, the whole Prime Minister setting out kind of like, I think did they announce like a 20 million or 10 million pound fund to secure Jewish, Jewish safety in in fact today, I think there was like a few thousand people outside Downing Street attacking the government on its failure to address anti-Semitism. That's the day on this Sunday. And when all that stuff happened, I thought to myself, as much as I felt empathy with the Jewish people and the community for the fear that they're feeling, and I get that, it did cross my mind, hold on, but what about us and our children who are actually killed, who lose their lives? They're not just stabbed and injured, they're murdered. It's like, where's the money to help with this? Why is Khan having to give 30 million for some youth clubs, only because young people in South London decided, you know what, let's teach them people what happens if you don't help us. What's going on? Anyway, let me move on. So yes, just as a reminder, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if you find the broadcast useful. This next section is the world news relating to our community over the past month and a bit. It's not as many stories. We're coming close to the end. I think I said that, and I just remembered actually we do have quite a few in the last section. So I'm going to whiz on. So where are we? Blah 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 blah. My voice is going as well. I can hear it. Okay, let's start with a good piece of good news. See, this should have been in the positives news section. Sometimes I forget these things. Okay, it's international news. That is good news. So some of you will know Ghana has actually announced visa-free entry for all African nationals beginning later this month. And so they shared this statement from the 25th of May. All African nationals will not be required to pay visa fees when visiting Ghana. And it's really a move done to coincide with African Day, which is celebrated annually, and it commemorates the 1963 founding of the Organization of African Unity, which is now known as the not so effective African Union. But this is actually a good move. It's Ghana's not the first African country to offer visa-free travel for African passport holders. Rwanda, the Gambia, Benin, and Seychelles all have implemented similar policies. I thought it was just something to share out, especially if you know what's happening in Tanzania or South Africa, for those of you who are not familiar. And in Tanzania right now, there's been a spate of xenophobia. It keeps emerging where Africans are attacking Africans who are coming to South Africa. Some of you know that there's a lot of wealth, even though it's not shared amongst African people in South Africa. So a lot of people migrate there, and now there's violence against them. Sister Oleander.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, and I fear I know the answer. Does that include
You do know the answer.
From around the world, or is it just Africans from the continent?
Yeah, it's African nationals. I think some nations are starting to move towards Africans in the diaspora. One of the things that happened in, what was it, the Durban Conference, I think it was. It's the one where Gus John attended. There was a move to recognize the diaspora as one of the states of the African continent. But I don't know if it's stalled, but I would say that the move hasn't crystallized. It hasn't got as far as it should do. So you have small nations, like individual nations like Barbados doing these kind of reciprocal deals, but not everyone's doing those deals. But it's small steps at a time, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. So it's a good question, that one. Okay, where are we? Okay. Just global politics. Meet Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko, who's the head of Senegal, and he's actually come out and done something which not many African leaders do, and they should do. He's come out straight out and criticized the Orange One in the White House over the war that the US and Israel are hosting against Iran. And he's saying that, look, this war is messing with the global order to no benefit to anyone else apart from America and Israel. And, this was an international conference on sovereignty when he was asked these questions. He spoke about how reducing Iran's ballistic capacities have not been achieved. Forcing Iran to abandon its nuclear program, both civil and military, is not an objective that's been achieved. So what is this all about? What is it about? None of the objectives have been met. And the world has been plunged into chaos that nothing can justify. So he's saying that the Trump is not a man of peace. He's a man who destabilizes the world. And he's calling for African nations to join forces, pull their power. And he's pointing to Africa's youth as a force to be mobilized, saying that sovereignty can't be achieved without their involvement. And I think it's quite brave, and it's quite inspiring to hear an African leader speak truth to power like this, because he's 100% right. 100% right. We cannot make movements without our young people, whether in the continent or in the diaspora. And without pooling our resources, we get picked off one by one. The Orange One in the White House has destabilized the world order, and things are only going to continue to get worse. In fact, it's only because of what he's done there in America that we have the growth of what's happening here in the UK with Farage and his bunch of merry clowns. But yeah, I just wanted to share that. The next story is a continuation of something we talked about briefly a few months ago. There's some tension. I don't want to get to the he said, she said of it. There's a tension. There's a charity that's co-founded by the Prince Harry, or the Duke of Sussex, I think is his former title, in Southern Africa, to honour his late mother, Princess Diana. Now, this charity, Sentebale, which supports young people with HIV in Botswana and Lesotho, filed a lawsuit according to court records, saying that the relationship between him and the board has broken down, and that Harry has been orchestrating a campaign of bullying and harassment to force her out. So she's fighting for her job. He wants her gone. And it's just going back and forth. And it's one of the rare times I actually agree with the Charity Commission. So the Charity Commission for England and Wales has investigated, and it's actually criticised both sides and said, like, why are you allowing this issue to be played out in public? Because what you're just doing is damaging the organisation's reputation. But the investigation also found there was no evidence of widespread bullying or misogyny at the organisation. So I don't know what's going on. I mean, we're not there, we're not privy to it. The investigation says it's clear. There's that saying, no smoke without fire. I don't know. But yeah, this is ongoing still, and it's a public spat. And our sister there, Sophie Chanduaka, says that the relationship is beyond repair. And yeah, I think we'll just leave that story there. And I think that's it for this section. And slide is deciding not to change, so computer says no. Why does computer say no? let's see if okay, that's a very fascinating position to be in. Okay, let's just okay, and wait, there we go. Computer said no for some reason. Okay, let's go. Being positive, this is the last section. Just a reminder, you're watching the Legality's Pan-African Community News Update. Sister Oleander is actually in the studio, so if you want to make a comment as we go through these last few slides, please, this is the time to do so. You're welcome to do so through Facebook, YouTube, as ever. Yeah, and of course, the usual, I'm not very good at that. Subscribe, share, like it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, let me just go over the positive news over the last month or so. There's been more than this, but of course, we try and get as much as we can, relevant ones in the short space we have. This program's been running for quite a long time. I think it's going to one of our long ones, but I'm trying to avoid. Okay, is it going to turn, or is the computer still saying no? Bizarre. Okay, computer still saying no. All right, let's see if we can do this manually. Yes, we can do it manually. Right. Okay. So, where do we start? Yes, the V&A inaugural exhibition. The Music is Black. This is a new landmark survey of our music in the UK, and it's just opened. I attended with my son. Thank you, Shola, for inviting me. It was all star-studded launch, loads of people from the media and music industry and stuff like that. It's a very interesting exhibition. It starts from the early drum beats in Africa, takes us right up to the latest innovations in drill, drum and bass, garage, two-tone, grime, pop, all that sort of stuff. It was put together over a 3-year period by the curator, Jacqueline Springer. She's a former journalist turned academic and curator. She amassed some 200 items. Now, many are permanent acquisitions. If you want to kind of like have a survey, it's different from the exhibition that was in the British Library. So it's kind of like more like an add-on. So, you can still see this one if you've seen that one as well. It's got some really clever innovations. There's some things I liked, some things I didn't like. But that's the same as any exhibition. It's a bit encyclopedic, which is not really my approach. The V&A's East artistic director, Gus Casey Hayford, says that Music is Black is a part of a wider push to reposition this history as central to the UK's cultural story. What happens so often is that British music, or Black British music, is presented as important but marginal. What we have tried to do here is say, this is our story, and it's one of our major contributions to the world. So if you've got time, check it out. The exhibition closes 3rd of January next year, so you've got time. It is fee paying, so I think the tickets range from £11 to £22. So depending on whether you're a student, under 26, it's a weekday or weekend. I think if you're a member, it's free of the V&A. Yeah, it's worth checking it out. And the nice thing is that it's actually at VA East, so it's pop up to Stratford and go in, spend the day, have a look around. There'll be some songs and stuff that will trigger some nice memories, take you back in the day. Okay. Just remember, I've got to do this. Oh, it did turn. Okay. This is an interesting story. It's a strange one. I say a strange one, but it's linked to our ecological concerns as Pan-Africanists. We don't talk much about them on this program, but we do have them. And it starts really with the message that things are looking up in oh God, in the Congo, Virunga Mountains. So in Congo's Virginia Mountains, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we're seeing scores of elephants who have been returning across the border following a reduction in militia violence. Now, you're thinking, Toyin, I'm completely lost. You're talking about elephants. Right, okay. The reason why this is here is because we've been talking about the conflict that's been taking place in the Congo for a long while. And what happens is, oh, did the image just vanish? Okay, so you're staring at me. And it's back again. Oh, we've got gremlins. Okay. And one of the reasons that happens is that when you have conflict, there are certain terrains that attract militias, and these are mountains, what they call jungles, borderlands, and these are often kind of like used for violent rebel groups around the world. And of course, this is what's taking place in Congo. But the other side of that is that it then displaces the elephants, and so there were once 1,000 of African bush elements in that region, and they just all moved out. So now to see them coming back slowly is quite amazing, because what it suggests is that the violent conflict in that area is actually reducing. And when they come back, what they start to do, for those of you who are interested, is that their massive bulk and massive appetites start to cut through the forest, making trails. They start making invasive shrubs and expanding clearings. And so they start to turn these spaces back into an habitat which is sustaining multiple life forms and species. So there's also now been sightings of buffalo as well. Now, and lions. I mean, so I know some people are thinking, Toyin, this doesn't sound like it's a Pan-African issue. It actually is. I don't often talk much about our ecological concerns, our interest in recycling, our interest in multi-speciesism, all these kind of things. But this is a good news story, and I just thought I would share that. Another good news story linked to one we spoke about earlier. I kind of touched on the research which showed that African women who experience racism and social economic deprivation, and also other factors, environmental factors, were at risk of fatality or of dying during childbirth. Well, what's happening now is that there's going to be training offered for NHS midwives to tackle this national emergency of racism, which means African women are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth. And this is coming from the Nursing and Midwifery Council, which regulates the profession. And I think this is actually a really good innovation. It says it's introducing mandatory anti-racism training in degrees to combat systemic discrimination. And often, of course, there's going to be people who push back and say, "Why do I need to learn about anti-racism? I'm just a nurse. I'm just a doctor, and I don't need to know that." Well, this is a problem that's been enduring for a long time. And as part of its announcement, the Nursing and Midwifery Council acknowledged not only the recent shocking figures from the campaign group Mothers and Babies, but they've also recognised and highlighted how racism is contributing to the unnatural and totally avoidable deaths of mothers and babies in Britain. Now, there was a report in the Times that revealed that NHS has been issued with 22 separate safety warnings by official bodies to address racial disparities in maternity care over the past decade, yet the situation has not improved. So doing nothing clearly is not enough. And stereotyping from clinical staff has also raised as a frequent issue that needs to be addressed. Patients of African heritage are being treated as though they were like tolerant to pain due to their so-called tough skin. Meanwhile, I think I might have spoken about this before, some Asian patients were stereotyped as princesses who were too demanding and unable to handle pain. So these racist stereotypes, all these things feed in to the poor quality of care that can happen. I shouldn't say can happen, that is happening, which results in some mothers not making it. And also there's risk to the life of the children. So under the initiative, all universities offering midwifery degrees will have to update their curriculum to include awareness of racial biases and discrimination. And from the next academic year, students will be taught about how racial stereotypes can affect care and how skin color can affect the presentation of symptoms. So this is, I think, like I said, I think this is a fantastic initiative. It's long overdue. I know it's going to be pushed back because whenever you tell people that you're going to have to learn about racism and actually treating people with care and with dignity, there's always those, the reform type clowns who will come back and say, no, we just want to treat everyone the same. And obviously they don't. And they certainly don't want to fund any kind of treatment or any kind of training like this. Almost there. Next story is about recognizing Harsden's deep-rooted connection to reggae music, and this has been done through the unveiling of commemorative paving stones, which honors some of the most influential figures in the genre, including the legend that is Dennis Emmanuel Brown. And this initiative, which is part of the wider Harsden Baseline project, celebrates the area's long-standing reputation as the reggae capital of Britain. It's a title which is earned through decades of cultural influence shaped by what they call the Windrush generation and their descendants. And as one of the organisers noted, we didn't want Harsden to become another place where our history and presence isn't documented and visible. And so now the Harsden Music Walk now stands as a permanent tribute to the artists, groups and industry pioneers who helped define the UK's reggae sound and its global reach. And amongst those honoured are key figures such as Janet Kay, who you can see in the image, who's a leading voice in Lovers Rock, alongside General Levy and the late Delroy Washington. Influential groups include Aswad, the Cimarroons and the Rough Cut Band, who have also been recognised, reflecting the collective power of bands that helped shape the UK's reggae identity. Excuse me. I've got a bit of phlegm there. Could be my voice. This is good. I mean, we're seeing a musical theme this week. Actually, it's quite interesting. I don't know Andrew Powell, but we're just going to wish him good luck. We've got this story through. He's been sworn in as King's Counsel, making a major career milestone for the leading family law barrister, known for handling complex, high-stake cases at the forefront of evolving legal issues. For those of you who are unaware, I apologise for those of you who do know. Why do we make a fuss about this? Why do we recognise and say something? If you know the legal section, it's like, you have advocates, like people who are, kind of like come in and help you and give you advice when it comes to legal matters. You have your solicitors, and those are like the first tier. They're the ones who go into magistrates' court with you and give you legal advice, and you see them when you're in the police stations. When they go to court, or when it goes to high court, when it goes to like Crown Court, then you have your barristers, and your barristers are the next level, and they're the ones who talk with each other. They wear the funny wigs unless they kind of like decide to grow up and take them off, and that's the next level, higher level. And then at the highest level in the legal profession, just before judges, which is obviously the ultimate in that sense, you have King's Counsel. It used to be called Queen's Counsel because that's when the monarch was a woman, but now it's Charles, and so it's King's Counsel. So he's moved up and he's reached this. His expertise is in cases considering children. His practice focuses on parental disputes about arrangements for children after separation, international children's law, including child abduction, and applications to relocate children to another country. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because I don't like to do adverts for someone's business, but I am recognizing, he's done well, and the story came to us, and we're just reporting it to you. So good luck. I hope you're a decent person doing this, and it's nice to have more African people, more representation in high echelons of British law. The next story, I probably put a smile on the face of my wife. We were down in Brighton a couple of weekends ago. There was this My Soul weekender, and we missed our train, and deliberately actually, because we walked past a shop and it was going to open in I think 15 minutes, and so we decided, okay, let's miss the train and wait for the shop to open and check it out. And I'd been there once before, but it was too busy to talk, and so this time we went there, and it's a Afrori. I don't know if Afrori, that's how you pronounce it. And it's a lovely shop, and if you've not been to Brighton, if you're taking a train down there, it's literally a few minutes walk away from the station. Now they've been running a campaign for a little while with its goal of selling 1,000 books, and this was really important to them because they had been facing the threat of being evicted. I've been following the story of this bookshop for quite a while, and they've moved location, and an independent bookshop specialising titles by African authors, especially those who are UK based. And so they set this goal of selling 1,000 books to kind of like secure their space. And they far exceeded it, which is fantastic news. Now, of course, bookshops of all ilks are struggling in a challenging economic climate. They launched a campaign which spread across TikTok and Instagram, using videos from educators, creators, public figures all speaking out on it. And I just wanted to commend them for that. I was lucky enough to chat a little bit with the founder, Caroline Bain, and we kind of had a nice little a chat about what was going on there. I think we'll do whatever we can to help support. They started as an online store before expanding into a physical shop in 2021, and since then it's become a finalist for the British Bookshop of the Year multiple times, and a key retailer for authors from our community in the UK. So this is good news. They made the fun, but let's not take anything for granted. They need to have a sustainable financial structure to avoid future financial crises. It's not a good time for anyone in retail at this particular moment in time. Certainly bookshops, while people are using kind of websites and generative AI more and more. This one's a bit closer to home, this particular story. Meet one Dylan Law, and he is set to become one of the UK's youngest deputy mayors after Hackney's recent election of votes. I say recent, it was yesterday. Was it yesterday or the day before yesterday? It's a bit bittersweet for myself and Oleander because we're based in Hackney, and we're happy for Dylan to kind of like make this progress. It's good. He's 20 years of age. He's a local organizer, and he's going to go in history books. You maybe know by now that Zoe Garbett actually also took the mayoral seat in Hackney. So the Green Party did exceptionally well. The reason why it's bittersweet is because our sister Antoinette, who was deputy mayor for the longest while, has been a staunch supporter of community issues. She's back in sickle cell and other issues, and of course, anyone associated with Labour and Hackney lost their seat. It was a thorough rooting out of the Starmer party. And this is part of the challenge because the local elections, the councils have nothing to do with what the MPs are doing. So if it was in Tottenham and it was like people got rid of David Lammy, I don't drink, but I'll probably, pour a glass and stuff like that. But what happens is that the people who are councillors, who are actually doing the day-to-day work and helping people on the ground, they're the ones who are suffering. And so Labour had a massive loss, and that's what's happening. But we've got to keep looking at change, and this is actually a good news story because he was Hackney born. He's a university student. He's in many ways representative of a shift in the capital, with many more younger Londoners demanding a greater say in how their communities are run and who gets to represent them. And I don't have a problem with that. I think that young people should be involved in these discussions, not just these discussions, in these decisions. And so Dylan being set to be one of the UK's youngest deputy mayors is actually a good thing, as long as he's got good people around him to help guide him. The one thing, this is something he said, one thing older councillors haven't experienced before is someone my age with conviction, someone who knows what they're talking about, someone who keeps sure of themselves after they tell me no. And he's likened his political awakening to his upbringing in Hackney, including experience of poor housing conditions and local controversies around discrimination in school and older political structures being stuck in their old ways. And so this is like a kick up the arse, his language, for the political system. It's saying that, look, you've been taking young people for granted. You think that we're thick, that we don't understand politics. And yeah, we don't know everything, but we're willing to learn. And we're passionate about change and we'll engage in the process. Who knows what's going to happen in 2 years' time? Many young people do not want a government run by reform. And so change is coming. Change is here. I don't want to sound like an Obama greatest hit record, but I just thought I'd share that story. And I think there's one more story. No, two more stories, isn't there? So next story, again, it's like the boxing. I don't know much about marathons and stuff like that. I don't think I have the stamina to run a marathon. But this year it ran. Is that the right term? The marathon ran. No. This year the marathon took place and people ran on it. And Sebastian Saw of Kenya smashed the men's world record by winning 26 London Marathon in 1 hour, 59 minutes and 30 seconds. Now, this is an amazing achievement because he wiped off 35 seconds off the previous title, which was held by the late Kelvin Kipton, who set a record of 2 hours and 35 seconds in 2023 in Chicago Marathon. And so for the next generation, it shows to run a record is possible, says Sari, who made a solo break in the final 2 kilometers. He sprinted down the mile past Buckingham Palace. And he's made history. He was well prepared for the marathon. He's happy because he had the courage to push, even though the pace was fast at places. I have seen a little bit on the news, people, maybe not the news, as articles I read. And I remember seeing something about people saying it's technology based. There was something about these new Adidas trainers that are made out of carbon or something, and they're saying, but people are always making excuses when people do well and trying to kind of like diminish their achievements. He did really well, and well done for that. And that's just the one story. The second story, which you can see in the image, is that of Tigist Assefa of Ethiopia, who retained the women's title with a time of 2 hours, 15 minutes and 41 seconds, breaking her own record from last year's London Marathon. So well done. The 29-year-old pulled away from the Kenyans Helen Obiri and Joyce Lynn Jebokosi down the home stretch to cross the finish line and beating the world record of 2 hours, 15 minutes, 50 seconds, which she herself set last year in London. So it's great to see these two winners, African men and women, kind of like setting these records. It's amazing, and like I said, I don't know much about the marathon, but this is a good news story. And anyone who's moaning about they're using trainers that are springy or something, just get a life, mate. Okay, and the last story for this week is, oh gosh, yes, it's me. Sorry, well, it's not me. It's we keep saying we're going to start showing cultural things, and this is a start of that. There's an event taking place at the Barbican, an exhibition called Black Planet: The Art and Culture of Pan Africa, and it's looking essentially at the impact of Pan Africanism on artistic and cultural production from the 1920s to the present. They're going to have around 300 works, from paintings and installations to posters, journals, and film. And yes, that image is of me with hair, for those of you who are shocked to see it. That's also my baby. Well, he's not my baby boy, that's my eldest boy. So that's when he's obviously much younger. It's an event taking place in June. I've forgotten the date because I'm crap like that. It's probably written on the screen. You can pause it and have a look at it. God, that's awful. Toyin, your memory is so bad. It is in June. We're going to be talking about music. We're going to be talking about archives. We're going to be talking about history making, intergenerational politics. How does it all connect? I'm going to squirm. If you want to see me squirm, you're welcome to attend. I hate it when people talk about my music career. I can't even look at the camera now. But apparently I'm supposed to be playing some of my old tracks at the same time, which I don't know if I'm going to do that, but we'll see. So it'll be tracks, music, discussion, talk. It's called, the young people, they call it a listening session. So I think you put vinyl on and you're supposed to all just stare at each other while you're listening to music. I don't think so. I'm going to mix that up a little bit. We're going to have Q&A and all that sort of stuff. That's taking place next month. There's other stuff. I know there is, what's that thing I want to go with? The harder they come. We spoke about Jimmy Cliff's passing in the last program. There's a remake of the film, and I think it's in the Stratford Royal East Theatre. I've got to double check it. But I hope you forgive me. There was so much news stories I just couldn't get anything else in. That's something that's taking place. That'll be running for a little while as well. And I know Sister Oleander and we saw some play about this hair shop in. It's gone. My brain's gone. I'm too tired. That's it. That's it for the week. Thank you, everyone. I don't know, Sister Oleander, if you've got anything you want to add before we sign off. Are you there? Am I alone? Is the internet cut off? Am I just talking to the computer? No.
Can you hear me? He was making me laugh a little bit then. Anyway, it's been a long show, so I think it's
What's the name
time
of that play
to...
with?
Say again? You say?
What was the name of that play that we saw? Where was it? That play, that one I cycled up to.
Oh, Hammersmith
To
something.
hear something.
Theatre. Hammersmith Theatre, something
Lyrical
like that.
theatre. That was it. Hammersmith Lyrical Theatre.
Yeah, that's it. And I've forgotten the name of the play myself, but yeah, I've forgotten the name of it. So I can't help you on that one. We're both in the same position.
That's okay. The play's probably
been a
finished
long
anyway,
week.
so.
And tomorrow's
But
Monday.
sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was just gonna say,
Yeah,
tomorrow's Monday, and it's great to be back, and we've missed you guys definitely. But just to say thank you so much for listening in and watching us as well at the same time, and we look forward to meeting you again in the next 2 weeks. Take care, walk good, and enjoy as the summer enters this realm.
That's definitely on that. And just as a heads up, just want to thank everyone who contributes to the program, Sister Angie, Brother Colin, Sister Am, everyone who provides research now and in the past. Going forward, our next broadcast is on Sunday, the 24th of May. It is the 10th, the 24th of May, same time, 6 p.m. Enjoy the summer, be safe. We're going into some dread times with the racism. Like I said, over 40% of the public voted for a racist party. That's not the whole public, that's just those who voted, but it's a significant number. Things are going to get ugly. If you're not sure what to do, just join a collective, Pan-African organization, support, donate, volunteer, whatever you can do. There's nothing else I can say. Whatever you do, like Sister Oleander said, walk good, be safe. And may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us all. Ashe.
Ashe.